Hello and welcome to Adult Bible Studies. Happy New Year. This is our first lesson in the new year, and I'm so glad that you could be with me for this time of Bible study. I'm Wayne Williams, and our Bible study lessons are presented as a ministry of Bluff United Methodist Church in Hoover, Alabama. We're using for our material the Cokesbury Adult Bible Study series. And in that series, we're beginning a new unit of lessons this Sunday. Not only a new year, but a new unit of lessons. And we're going to be looking at the overall themes of wisdom and discernment. Wisdom and discernment. And we're going to use 4 different examples from Scripture of people who have exhibited wisdom and discernment. Wisdom takes many forms in our world. There's the wisdom of the educated, the scholar, the person who has a lot of information and has access to that and can be wise because of that extra information that they have, perhaps over someone who's not an expert in their field and that sort of thing. That's wisdom, yes. There's also a godly wisdom. There's a wisdom where God gives us insight, information, knowledge, that little punch of the Holy Spirit that allows us to put things together in our minds in a way that we can gain understanding that is truly just a gift of God and something that He does, calling us into ministry and calling us into fulfilling His purposes in the world. This is the type of wisdom I think that we really want to look at as we think about wisdom in this way. Discernment is the other topic, and they go hand in hand, wisdom and discernment. What good is wisdom, all this knowledge, all this cognitive information, all this resources that we can draw on, if we don't have with that discernment? That is the ability to examine a situation and really see what of that information that we have access to, what of that insight that we know, what of those experiences that we base our responses on, what of those have anything to do with this, and can discern between that which is good, better, and best. I refer back to that often because I remember how Sears and Roebuck used to do that good, better, and best in their catalogs. There's a good, better, and best about discernment. Discernment looks for that which is best. It examines and uses insight and wisdom and understanding. Discernment is the active part of wisdom. And without discernment, wisdom is not really as effective as it could be. We've all heard about people who were book smart, but not very street smart, who didn't have much common sense, even though they had a lot of intellect. That's a part of what we're talking about here, is how to blend those together. And we look at these 4 different accounts in this unit of lessons. We're going to see how God uses wisdom and insight to guide His people in situations, to perform His will and to move His will for humankind along in the world and in their day and in their time. We're going to look this week at the Magi and see how they were wise men, but they were also wise men who had discernment. We're going to look at Joseph and see how he was given insights in his dream that he dreamed, and where he saw that God had great purposes for his life, and how he had the discernment to use that in a way to continue to see what God was doing in his life. Even when things were pretty bad, he was still able to discern that God was in this and working through it. We're going to look at Solomon. Certainly, anytime we think about wisdom in the Bible, we think of Solomon, because Solomon was asked of God, "What do you want?" And Solomon had enough human wisdom, enough insight, enough empathy and caring for his people, that he didn't ask for great riches. He didn't ask for his nation to become the dominant power in the world. Instead, he asked for wisdom. He asked for that ability to put together the things he knew and make good decisions. And we have lots of examples of that in the life of Solomon. Lastly, we're going to look at Daniel. How Daniel in exile in Babylonia, how he was wise and how he interpreted the king's dreams and how he used this in a way to authenticate the power and the validity of his own God, so that he and others were able to continue to worship Yahweh instead of the Babylonian gods. Wisdom, discernment, they really do go hand in hand. Well, today's lesson has two different Bible passages. The first one is from Proverbs, the 2nd chapter, verses 8 and 9. Let's look at that real quickly. He protects the paths of justice and guards the way of those who are loyal to him. Then you will understand righteousness and justice, as well as integrity, every good course. Being able to discern between that which is good, better, best. Being able to put that together. And who is it that provides the motivation for this, provides the insights, that extra insight that goes beyond just information? God himself. He protects the paths of justice and guards the ways of those who are loyal to him, those who will turn aside their own will, who will soften their ears as far as hearing everything that's going on around them and all the ways the world is drawing them here, there, and yon, and using up their resources and using up their time and their energy, and they can hear that still small voice of God as he calls them into action. God guards the ways of those who are loyal to him and able to listen with those ears to hear that Jesus talks to us so often about. Then you will understand righteousness and justice. What is wisdom? Wisdom is understanding what is good and correct and how it all fits together. Wisdom is that ability to go beyond just the facts. It's about putting it all together and seeing intent and the heartfelt reasons behind things. And also, as a person of faith, looking for God's will in things. Well, that's Proverbs. And that's a good lead-in for this lesson today. Now we're going to look in Matthew, the 2nd chapter, more traditional passage for this time of year, as we look at the Magi. I'm going to just read through that and then we'll go back and look at it. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the territory of Judea, during the rule of King Herod, Magi came from the east to Jerusalem. They asked, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We've seen his star in the east, and we've come to honor him." When King Herod heard this, he was troubled, and everyone in Jerusalem was troubled with him. He gathered all the chief priests and the legal experts and asked them where the Christ was to be born. They said, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what the prophet wrote. You, Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means are you least among the rulers of Judah, because from you will come one who governs, who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and found out from them the time when the star had first appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search carefully for the child. When you found him, report to me so that I too may go and honor him." When they heard the king, they went and looked. The star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with Mary, his mother. Falling to their knees, they honored him. Then they opened their treasure chests and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Because they were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they went back to their own country by another route. What a good story here as we think about wisdom and discernment. Who were the Magi? They were wise men. They were men who were learned. They were men who, in their day and time, had a sense of science and of what could be proven and not proven, what the questions of the universe and of the world, and they were sensitive to these things. They also studied the stars, and when they saw this star, they were encouraged because they interpreted it to mean that a king had been born. And so this motivated them to search out and to see where this new king had come. And so they used their understanding, they used their scientific knowledge, the knowledge of that day, and based upon that, they left on a journey, not really quite sure where they were going. Sounds a little bit like Abraham, doesn't it? When God called him and he said, I want you to go to a far and distant land. And he didn't give Abraham any sense of where that land would be. The Magi, too, left on a journey with just the confidence of God and of the fact that his will was being performed in the world. And they wanted to be witness to it, and they wanted to observe it. This is true understanding, and it's discernment in that they saw enough facts that they were able to say, this is indeed important. This is not just something we need to record and write about. We need to go and see. We need to put feet to our knowledge and to our understanding. We need to act upon this. How often do we, in our personal faith, learn truths about God, and yet we fail to go that extra step in asking God to help us find a way to apply these truths and to be his people in our world, in our day. The Magi were not like that. They took action. They left their homeland and they sought out. They came to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the capital city of that area, and certainly that would be a place where you would start out to ask information about these sort of things. And they asked information of several people. In fact, they never went directly to King Herod until he invited them to come to see him. They asked about the star, and this stirred the people up. People started saying, what star? What's happening? How do you mean something new and different is happening here in Judea? We don't know anything about anything new that's happening in our world. The priests and the scribes and the others that were studying the scriptures, they hadn't gotten any cues from God. Perhaps this is a little bit of a sign to them to say, wake up, people. You've gotten a little asleep at the controls here. You're not listening to God. You haven't done as it talks about in Proverbs, where it says those who love him and who are directed by him, you've gotten off track. And now these foreigners are coming in and enlightening you, rather God being able to enlighten you through his spirit and through his relationship with you. What a testimony that would be. And certainly that would get them kind of stirred up when they were supposed to know these things and supposed to be aware of these things. They were supposed to satisfy that prophetic role where they kept the king involved on what was going on. Herod called them together and demanded an answer. And as they searched the scriptures, they found in Micah, the 5th chapter and the 2nd verse, a reference that they took to mean referred to the Messiah and his coming. That's that verse 6 where he says, you Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means are you least among the rulers of Judah, because from you will come one who governs, who will shepherd my people Israel. Bethlehem was just a small little middle-class village, and yet think about it. Bethlehem was the home origin of David and of Jesus. It is a place where greatness can be shown. Perhaps that in wisdom helps us to say, oh, hold on a minute. Maybe it's not just in the great institutions of learning that we get the information that we need. Maybe it is in just the living out of our lives and being faithful to God and utilizing our skills and our hands to be the people of God that allows God to speak to us and utilize us. Oh, Bethlehem. By the worldly standards, you were just a small little along the way kind of village. but in the eyes of God, you were great. Sounds a little bit like Mary standing before the angel Gabriel and saying, me? How can I be of help to God? I'm just a lowly handmaid. And yet God saw into her heart, and he saw the sincerity and the ability to commit and to be the mother that Jesus would need. So likewise, here, Bethlehem has become that special place where God could enter the world and speak to the world of his love and of his grace. It was only then, when the scholars and scribes and others came to Herod and gave him this answer, that he became interested enough to ask the Magi to come and to visit with him. And his mind was that of deception and that of trickery. We can see clearly that he doesn't have the intent of really wanting to honor this new king. As a fact, he probably sees him as a direct challenge to his kingship. Herod, was not a king from the lineage of David. He was a king that had been appointed by the Romans, and he had a very precarious position where he stood between the religious leaders of the Jews and the Romans, and his authority and his power rested very much on his ability to keep both of those groups satisfied. He was not a true king in the sense of a king having autonomy and power and the ability to make decisions as in a kingly kind of way. And certainly something like this would have been a great challenge to him. And so he calls the people together, and he calls the Magi in, and he says, tell me about this. And they explain to him a little bit about what's going on. And he says, that is just really interesting. As a matter of fact, I would love to be able to go and pay homage to this new king myself. Perhaps he is God raising for us a new king. I'd like to know him. And so, on the one hand, he is able to present a front to these Magi that says, I've been looking for the Magi, for the Savior as well. And I am interested in what you're doing in that sense alone. This is worldly wisdom, isn't it? It's that information that we take and twist and mold, and we use it to deceive and to present a false face. There's a lot of wisdom in our world, isn't there? There's a lot of people with a lot of understanding and a lot of knowledge, a lot of psychology and that sort of thing, where they can manipulate and control the situations and do things, make things come out the way they want them to do. And yet their intent is not to do that best thing. It's not even to do the good thing. Certainly not better or best. They're looking, the good for them is simply defined in what this means to me, how it affects me, what's in this for me. The Magi go ahead and they find Jesus. The star helps them. This star is kind of a paradox, isn't it? We're not sure exactly what that means. We come up with all kinds of ideas. Maybe it was a comet. Maybe it was any number of things that could have happened. Astrological anomalies could have produced this kind of effect. And yet we don't know exactly what it was, but we do know that the Magi, because they were sincerely seeking to use their knowledge of the fact that God was involved in the world and was doing something great, and they acted upon it, that they were able to find this place and know exactly where they were and go before Mary and Jesus and present their gifts. A couple of quick things I just want to say here. It says that it doesn't say that they saw Jesus as a baby. Matter of fact, they probably came quite a bit after his birth. They said they visited with Mary and Jesus in a house, not in a stable. They didn't show up as we often depict in our manger scenes and that sort of thing, them coming at the exact time of his birth and that sort of thing. It took them a while to get there. And yet God in his faithfulness brought them to the point where they could see his son and know that he was a special person. And they gave their special gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh, gifts that you would give to a king, gifts that would acknowledge royalty and greatness. There's 3 of those gifts. Does that mean there was 3 magi? I don't know. It says they, so certainly there seems to be more than just one magi, but certainly these wealthy, affluent, scholarly people didn't just travel alone. They probably had an entourage of people who went with them to care for them and to protect them and to help them on their journey. So they came and they presented these gifts to Jesus to acknowledge his greatness. And then because they continued to keep their hearts and minds open to God and his direction, God was able to redirect them, to help them understand not so much every detail of Herod's deceit, but just enough to know that they needed not to go back to him and they needed to go home another way. It's not part of our lesson today, but later Herod gets very frustrated because they didn't come back, and he sends soldiers into Bethlehem to kill children up until a certain age. But by this time, God had also intervened again in the heart of Mary and Joseph and encouraged them to flee to Egypt. And so Jesus was spared from that time of reckoning that Herod tried to, in his own humanistic kind of way, control the situation. The wisdom and the worship of the Magi. They are good examples, even though they're not Jewish people. They're Gentiles. They're from the East. They came with an open heart and an open mind, and they came with enlightenment and a sense of purpose and understanding that allowed God to use them. May God be able to use us in like ways this new year as we open our hearts and lives to him, to be his people in all the things we do. God bless you this week. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.